Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts absolutely loves to rip a seam. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. Stumbled over my words a little bit there, but I still got it off. This is our last division preview. Saved the best for last. Actually, arguably the best division in football for last. Here to join me to preview the NFC North. He wrote about the NFC North for the always great FTN Almanac. It used to be Football Outsiders Almanac. Now it's the FTN Almanac. Really indispensable. Honestly, you should, like, if you want to know about football, but also it's helpful with fantasy. It's helpful, I'm probably with gambling. I don't know. Like, it's great. So you should check it out. And you should especially check out the NFC North chapters authored by Dan Pizzuta. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to be here and fun to, like you said, somehow it just kind of turned into the most fun division, maybe. I think we can argue with the best, but I think most fun might be the accurate way to put it.
I think most fun is absolutely accurate because I'm genuinely interested in watching all of these teams,
yes,
especially after Caleb Williams preseason, which we've talked about a lot. I'm actually glad we waited until the end to preview this because the Vikings had some obviously uncertainty not like uncertainty. They drafted J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy got hurt. And I said last week, don't worry, we're going to talk about Sam Darnold in this offense and whether or not it's still tenable, I guess, whether or not they can vie for the playoffs, because it actually kind of worked out for me doing the NFC North last. So we're going to get into that today. I'm really excited too, because I've kind of like had some time to process it. I went back and watched a little bit of Sam Darnold from 2022, which I think is worth getting into. But before we get started, if you guys are listening to this, that's great. It's also on YouTube, youtube.com/@MinaKimes. I also have an interview with the amazing and funny and super talented Cam Jordan on YouTube. Go check that out, especially if you're a Saints fan. I think you'll like what you have to hear there. So yeah, all right, let's get into it. Let's start with the Vikings.
Sure.
Yeah, like the newsiest team, the team that I've been promising to talk about for a while. Let's just get right into it and start with the Sam Darnold of it all. So when you wrote the chapter, obviously at that moment it was kind of a quarterback competition. And there was actually, even before J.J. McCarthy got hurt, it was not clear when he was going to be starting. The Vikings paid Sam Darnold a fair amount of money, which, as when we talked about Gardner Minshew earlier this week, is a pretty good indicator that they're actually going to give a veteran backup a chance. So let's just rip off the Band-Aid. Does Sam Darnold have a chance in this offense, which is arguably, obviously, you can't really count the Niners last year, the best situation he's ever been in?
Yeah, I'm going to come down on yes, but I don't know if I'm going to put that on Sam Darnold, right? Because I think that there is a lot of structure in this offense right now that will allow Sam Darnold to kind of still be the quarterback he's been kind of throughout his career, whether that's, been some of the ups and downs earlier in his career, or even some of like the good stuff he did show in Carolina a little bit. I think there's enough offensive structure here that he is just really going to be helped by that offense. And I think just kind of like, I go back to what Nick Mullins was able to do at the end of last year. So Nick Mullins, 11th in EPA per play from weeks 14 to 18 on the Vikings last year, while having a 7 to 8 touchdown to interception ratio. So like that's kind of a Sam Darnold type of thing, right? He's probably going to make some bad decisions, throw some interceptions, but there's going to be a lot of good in that offense that I think will allow it to be a productive offense without Sam Darnold having to individually be a good quarterback, which I think is the way I'm going to hedge this conversation.
No, I like it. The Mullins comp is actually pretty good. I think there's a reason that the Niners, by the way, were drawn to both of these two quarterbacks. And I think with Darnold, similarly to actually Mullins, which I think is why they ultimately made the change. They had Josh Dobbs, they had Jaron Hall in the building. They went through it. The Vikings last year went through a lot. They wanted, a quarterback who would push the ball downfield. And Darnold is that guy. He will take risks with the football. Unfortunately, sometimes he takes too many risks with the football. But I think when you go back to the year in Carolina, and there were ups and downs there, that was probably a better picture of who he is and kind of who I expect him to be with Minnesota, largely, obviously, because it's more recent than the time with the Jets. But I also think there's kind of elements of that offense and that offensive structure that do translate here. I think about the games where Darnold played well, including, by the way, against the Seahawks in 2022. He beat the Seahawks. And he looked really good under center. In fact, I went back and I double checked, and he was actually in Carolina, fourth in CPOE under center, 18th when he was in the gun. When you pair him with an effective play action game from under center and an effective rushing attack, I think that is the way. And that's what the Vikings want to do. That is the offense. It is the most under center offense in the NFL. We can get to whether or not they'll be able to run the ball, which I think is a big component of that as well. The other thing that I think interesting to me, you don't want to draw too much, it was like, I think 7 games in Carolina. It wasn't even half a season. So you don't want to like draw too much from the stats there. But one stat that I think is really instructive and going to be probably key to whether or not Sam Darnold can actually kind of pull this off. So when he was in Carolina, when he actually threw the ball in 2.5 to 3.5 seconds, which is, you could call that in rhythm. Yeah. 3.5 is a little bit on the longer side, obviously. He was first in QBR in the NFL. He had a QBR of 90. It was just everything outside of that where horrible stuff happened, particularly when he held on to the football. The problem is he had a time to throw of 3.24, which is incredibly unsustainably long. And why we don't, I can say, this window of 2.5 to 3.5 where most plays in the NFL happen, he was actually quite good. But the problem is he didn't. He held on to the ball too long. His time to throw was too long. So I think in Minnesota, if they can get him to play a touch faster, coupled with the fact that you've got skill players, obviously, particularly Justin Jefferson, who will come down with the football, I think there's a formula there to limit some of his mistakes. And as you said, a structure that really supports what he does well.
Yeah. And I think when you kind of go back to some of the things that Darnold was good at, some of that 2021 season, they were using they didn't use empty a lot, but he was great in empty. That's kind of like, if you look at what his efficiency was, it pretty much all came from when they were in empty. And that was getting the ball out quickly. That deters blitzing, so that stops him from being under pressure. The Vikings didn't use a lot of that last year, but it has been something O'Connell has done. Back with the Rams, they were a team that used a lot of empty with that year with Matthew Stafford, the vertical empty game that was really, more vertical than we really see usually from an empty set. So I think they could use a little bit more of that. You look at when he was pushed back in 2022 into the offense, it was like a third of his plays were off of play action. A third of his throws were, at or behind the line of scrimmage. So there were some massive training wheels on what he can do, but I think that's all going to be in place. The Vikings offense, the way Kevin O'Connell kind of designs crossers is I think one of my favorite things in the league. Just the way from different looks, the way they're able to kind of move guys all around. There's always openings. Cousins fourth in the rate that he threw to crossers. So I think that's a lot of empty space over the middle of the field can create after the catch. And like you said earlier about, pushing the ball downfield, if you look at what they were doing in the preseason, now I know it's one game for everybody, but when you look at average depth of completion, among all quarterbacks who have thrown a pass, Sam Darnold was 4th, JJ McCarthy was 5th, and Nick Mullins was 7th. So this is an offense that has been trying to push the ball down the field a little bit. So I think when you can have some of the high upside there, that's going to potentially get away from, some of making up for some of the mistakes that might come with pushing it. And again, none of these guys have been throwing to Justin Jefferson yet. Haven't been throwing to Jordan Addison either. So there is a lot to like about the structure of the passing offense that I think will be able to kind of sustain itself a little bit just because of the pieces that are in place.
I think a lot of the success of the passing attack, too, is going to just come down to openness on the part. It sounds obvious, of course, but you talked about how much this offense has been based on in-breaking. You mentioned crossers, but this is an offense that, with Kirk Cousins, really flourished over the middle of the field. You had 2 receivers in Justin Addison who were really good working the middle of the field, and especially when Hawkinson is there. The way it compromises defenses is really special. That's where I get a little nervous about Sam Darnold, because I don't think he's a quarterback who works that area of the field. This is why I thought JJ McCarthy was actually such a great draft pick for them, because I thought, yes, you see the vision, crossers, play action, middle of the field, it makes sense. Darnold, you've seen make a lot of mistakes throwing the ball to that part of the field. However, again, he has not thrown to guys like Justin Jefferson over the middle of the field, for whom a 50-50 ball is an 80-20 ball. It's a very different proposition. But I do think, like what you're saying about, Kevin O'Connell, who I'm super high on, his ability, the way he uses motion and formation to get those guys open over the middle of the field, I think will help Darnold in a way that he has not been helped. He just has to sort of rise to the occasion there. I do worry about the run game, though, because as I mentioned, I thought Darnold was at his best in Carolina when, hilariously, after trading Christian McCaffrey, they were still like incredibly good running the football. That was like a funny and weird thing that happened. So the Vikings are not good at running the ball. They've been bad at running the ball now for a couple of years. And I think what is interesting about that, or I guess what I want to talk to you about, is kind of parsing out why, because some of it is that I think that they just haven't had backs with a lot of juice. I thought, Dalvin Cook, at the end of his time there, was not very good, couldn't create on his own. I thought Alexander Mattison was really bad for them last year. Now you're pivoting to Aaron Jones, combination of him and Ty Chandler, who looked better, by the way. So there's that. And then there's the run blocking. This is a very good pass protecting offensive line. They are not as good blocking the run. Now, last year, because of all the carousel at quarterback, they faced, they didn't face as advantageous, and pardon me, the absence of Justin Jefferson, perhaps even more so.
Right.
They weren't facing like those easy run looks that I think they'll face when everybody's on the field. Do you think there's a reason to believe this Vikings run game can be better than they were over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I do. And I think it kind of plays into all of the circumstances that are kind of going to be changing going into the season. Like you said, they were 28th in DVOA on runs against stack boxes, which is just all of the factors that could have gone wrong for them really did. And I think it was a thing, like you said, the run blocking just wasn't there. The like marriage of the run and the pass, they just couldn't really figure that out because there was nothing working with the run. So they tried a couple of
Kevin
different
O'Connell like punted on it, really.
Yes.
Like if you look at all their situations, he was like, all right, F it, I'm not running the ball, because they were terrible.
Yeah, and that was a big thing they went into last year talking about, was like, we want to get better at running the ball. And then like a couple of weeks into the season, they were just like, it's not worth it. So the one thing I do like is I think the backs do play a part in here. The run blocking was not good, but I think that was also compounded by the running backs they've had that haven't really been able to have the vision to even stop the negative plays from getting worse. And I think that's where Aaron Jones is great. And that's kind of where he was really good last year with Green Bay. I know we kind of remember the big 100-yard games that he had toward the end of the season, but the Packers weren't a very explosive run game during the regular season. Even when they were like, top 5 in efficiency over the second half of the season, it was just mostly in avoiding negative plays. Like Aaron Jones just did not get hit behind the line of scrimmage, or even if he did, he was gaining yards. So there was no big negative plays. And I think that's what he's going to be able to bring to the Vikings. So even if it's not a highly explosive run game that's going to be, a weapon in that sense, it's going to stop them from, being stopped behind the line quite as often as they were. And I think just having that is going to be a big upgrade over what they've had.
Agree. Yeah. You just want it to look efficient. I think it's okay if it's not as explosive. And Aaron Jones for years now has been an exceptional under center wide zone back. And you see why. We'll talk about the Packers, which I thought was a very interesting and kind of curious move in some ways. You can easily see why the Vikings wanted him, because he is, like the perfect back for their scheme, which has a lot of similarities to the Packers in that regard. So I'm optimistic about some improvement. I do think that the line does limit it a little bit, honestly. But what will really help more than anything is just if defenses actually have to fear this passing attack, and healthy Justin Jefferson goes a long way in that regard. I'm very optimistic about this defense, and I'm excited to talk about it because it was one of the more fascinating units in the NFL last year. Just weird as shit. I mean, just crazy. I mean, I've talked about we talked about all last season. Anytime you're first in both rush 3 and rush 6 rate, crazy happening, especially when you're playing all kinds of crazy zones behind that, which is what Brian Flores did to stop the bleeding and try to generate a pass rush. As the year went on, you saw that kind of decline in efficacy. I think his teams were a little less taken aback by it. However, they have made a lot of additions that I think are really significant on that side of the ball. So up front, you add the big signing, Jonathan Grenard, to rush the passer with Danielle Hunter walking out the door. You also add Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman at linebacker. And then this was just happened. They had a very weak cornerback group. They lost players. Obviously, there was the tragic loss of one of the players they just drafted. They traded away Andrew Booth, but they signed Stephon Gilmore, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I guess we should start. I kind of want to start kind of bigger picture. Do you think with all of these additions, this defense will just look a little more normal?
So yes and no. I think Flores is always going to Flores to an extent. I'm not sure if it's going to be as much as we saw in 2023 because, like you said, they kind of did some crazy stuff out of necessity. The weird thing is, like, we look at that a lot, and it didn't always work, right? They blitzed at the highest rate in the league, but they were only 21st in pressure rate when they blitzed. So it wasn't like the blitzing was really like making a huge impact. When they blitzed and didn't get pressure, they had a 63% success rate allowed, which was 31st. So there was a lot of boom and bust to this offense. So I still think structurally they're going to want to do a lot of the weird things, create chaos around the line of scrimmage that they did. But I do think with the personnel, it's going to be more successful in the ways that they're able to kind of to cover it up. Because like when you weren't getting pressure, there wasn't a lot of there really wasn't a lot of success in the secondary. So you were really leaving guys kind of on islands a lot. Yeah. And I think that's going to help. I mean, when you kind of look at, it's funny that the secondary is Byron Murphy, Shaq Griffin, and Stephon Gilmore, which is like would have been real cool in like 2017. And now like it's a 2024.
Stephon Gilmore is still good. He's still good. There's so many times with like in this time of year when there's like late signings and there's a little bit too much name recognition relative to the ability of the player, particularly on defense. You see that a lot. I maintain that Stephon Gilmore still plays at a really high level. And you saw that.
Right. Yeah, no. That was the point I was making. It's just kind of funny that the names are what they are, but
it is funny.
But it is good. Like Stephon Gilmore, 15th among outside corners last year in catch rate over expectation. So he was like, he's not going to be the defensive player of the year type of corner that he might have been in the past, but it's still a very good corner and much better than what the Vikings were running out last year when they had to like move Byron Murphy to the outside. Like he's much better in the slot. He should be in the slot. He'll be in the slot this year, but they had to move him outside because they just didn't have anyone who was able to handle that load for the whole season. So I think just in that sense, like that secondary is going to be better, especially in coverage. And then I think you're going to have a more consistent pass rush when, I don't know how often they're going to be rushing forward, but you do have all of these guys. When you have Greenard who can get off the line, one of the fastest rates, 8th in pass rush get off last year for Next Gen Stats, 10th in quick pressures. So I think when you have that element now, you have Van Ginkel, who's such a fun, versatile piece that I think is a great fit into Flores' offense. Obviously, he did play that way in Miami, but now I think he's even a better pass rusher than he was early in his Miami career with Flores. So I think you just have all of those pieces come together, and I just think they kind of upgraded at least a little bit everywhere, which I think is going to make the whole defense just kind of work better as a whole.
Yeah. It's kind of like, okay, now we can turn to some of the weirder stuff situationally rather than this being the meat and potatoes of what we do. I think of note, a lot of the additions that they've made in that front seven in particular should help against the run too. I think of Grenard, Blake Cashman, and Van Ginkel, I think all will, well, particularly Grenard and Cashman, I think will help. I really like the combination of Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr. too, because they have such different skill set. Ivan Pace Jr. was like a delightful surprise for this team. 7th round or undrafted or something crazy. And that guy can fly. He can really cover. But I think you did need more of that kind of stout, every down type backer, especially given they play so much dime. So there's a lot of, a lot of times just one linebacker is on the field for them. And I think Cashman is just he's just super solid. I was so impressed by him in Houston last year. So I think the structure now, or just like there's just more, there's not like holes that they have to cover up quite the same way. And I think, like, in particular, Gilmore, man, like, I was like, oh, I really like the safety group, Metellus and Bynum, and there's so much versatility back there. Obviously, Harrison Smith's still there. But the corner was such a big question mark for me. And so to address that, I thought was interesting and also fascinating because, like, they want to win, which, that of note, that signing was after the JJ McCarthy injury and, Sam Darnold becoming the starter. This is not a team that is throwing in the towel this season. They clearly view themselves as a competitive roster. And I'll wrap here. I can see it. I do think this division is really tough and it's going to be an uphill battle, but I can see why they think that they could actually, contend for the playoffs this year.
Understand why they think that, because there's still a lot of talent on this roster, right? It's not something where it's a complete reset. This was a team that was like kind of close last year. So there's good things to like. I think, whether it's the Vikings or the Bears, like, this is going to be the best worst team in a division, no matter like who it is.
Yeah.
So I understand them trying to kind of push it because of where they are. And really the only reset they had was at quarterback. And again, they're not like totally resetting at this moment. So I completely understand where it is. And it makes sense because I think there are a lot of things in place that will help them compete this year.
Yeah, I tend to agree with all of that. There's a couple things too. I'm joining Greg Rosenthal on NFL Daily, and we're doing like betting over unders. And the Vikings are a team I like over 6.5. Part because I think all the reasons we've just been discussing, obviously, but also because last year they had the second worst turnover differential in the NFL, which tends to not be super stable. Famous last words before Sam Darnold starts at quarterback, though. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's talk about the division favorites. Some people actually are going in a different direction, but the betting favorites, speaking of that, are the Detroit Lions. Let's start with the offense because it's mostly the same. So I don't think there's too much to cover in terms of change. Kevin Zeitler's now at guard with Jonah Jackson in LA. Otherwise, similar. Everything's pretty similar across the board. I think the biggest question, the biggest thing that you're hearing out of camp in the summer, and the thing that maybe, I've talked about this, could be the difference between the Lions being a top 5 or 6 offense versus a top 1 or 2, which is Jameson Williams. And whether or not he's that dude. Let's start here. Do you think that that's putting too much emphasis on him?
I don't think that's too much to put on him, or whether it's, him or someone else who emerges as a wide receiver too. And I don't think there is anyone else really. So I do think it is kind of on him, but I think that's the most important position on this offense right now, because they really need that piece. Like, the wide receiver 2 is going to be kind of like the third option in the passing offense, but you kind of need that legitimate outside threat to happen, because you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have Sam Laporta. All of that is happening in the middle of the field, which is where Jared Goff is great, where the Lions have been able to exploit kind of better than almost any other passing offense in the league. And they've really leaned into that. But if you don't have something happening on the outside, you really don't really have that explosive play, because, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta aren't really those type of guys. So if you can have that deep kind of passing, it makes someone defend the vertical, then you can't really be crowding the middle of the field quite as much. So that's what's going to open up the offense. If Jameson Williams becomes that receiver that we kind of thought he could be, that's going to be awesome. But just like, you kind of just have to stretch the field in that way to stop defenses from really crowding that middle of the field. So you can also use that where is your biggest strength.
It's what Ayuk does for the Niners.
Yes.
And I'm not putting Jameson Williams in. I'm so high on Ayuk, but the point is about space. It's, can you, as a team that runs, that uses heavier personnel groupings, they don't use 21 like the Niners, but they use multiple tight ends and whatnot, and a fullback occasionally. Can you compromise defenses by using the entire football field? And I've talked about this with Williams, it's so ripe for an outside receiver because of the matchups you get, because of the emphasis that teams place on stopping the run. Obviously, they face a ton of single high, a lot of base defense. Like, it's so juicy for a receiver to win on the outside. Along those lines, by the way, I will add one other thing in addition to, because the question we have with the Lions isn't, we know this is going to be an awesome offense. I think the question is just I actually would say the Niners are a great comparison. Can you take this from your level to the Niners level? Is really, and it's, by the way, a fair question, because you have everything else. You have a better offensive line, just for starters. Right. Your offensive line is a weapon, but whether or not you can be more explosive through the air as well really hinges on whether or not you can actually have Williams emerge as that vertical threat. And we'll see. I don't know, honestly. I will add one other thing, though, Dan, that I'm kind of curious about the offense, and this really, to continue with the Niners thing, can Jahmyr Gibbs emerge as a pass catcher this year? Because coming out of college, the thought was he's going to be okay running between the tackles, but he's not that strong, but he's going to be electric in the open field, and he's going to run option routes and stuff. The opposite happened. He was actually incredible as just a pure running back, but he didn't really take off as a pass catcher. And similarly to the Williams argument, we talked about how the way defenses play them, there's so much opportunity on the outside and deep. There's also opportunity for a running back who can catch passes the way Christian McCaffrey can, because of the way defenses play this team.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things where I am going to believe he's able to do that when I see it, because we talk ourselves into, oh, this running back can play the slot. He can line up there and catch passes. He runs routes like a wide receiver, and only Christian McCaffrey does that in practice. There really is. I think when I was writing something about Christian McCaffrey, I think before the Super Bowl, I had a chart of receptions and targets, or maybe it was yards and targets of running backs from the slot. And it was Christian McCaffrey all the way up here, and everybody else was down there. He plays a different sport. And I think we've tried to see a lot of these teams say they can do it and they want to, and then it just doesn't work in practice, so they just completely abandon it, because you really have to make an effort to have a running back out there. And if you have a running back in the slot, is that going to be in pony personnel? And we've kind of seen that doesn't work quite as well in practice as it does in theory, because usually that running back is not as good as your slot receiver is. That's going to be especially true on the Lions when it's Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta who are kind of clogging up that piece of the field. So I think there is more ceiling to be discovered with him as a pass catcher. Whether it's going to fully be in some Christian McCaffrey role that opens up this offense to a level that you kind of think it would in that way, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I do believe he can be more involved in a pass catcher, but I think it's just not going to be quite as impactful in that way.
Yeah, maybe the better comp is can he be more like Alvin Kamara with the Saints, than who is, God, crazy that I'm just Alvin Kamara catching passes for the Saints, running wheel routes and the like. But I do think that would be meaningful, because the more of these guys that credibly threaten as pass catchers, just the easier it is to hunt matchups. I think I'm so high on this offense for, it's not hard to be high on it, but the other thing, Sam Laporta was awesome year one as a tight end. He broke records. That does not happen in the NFL. He led the team in target share on third down, by the way, which I was that blows my mind. The idea that he could be even better year two is again, like there's so many. This team it presents such an interesting and difficult just group of covers for defenses because you have just so many guys with bigger body types, St. Brown as well, who can block and catch passes and run routes. And I just feel like if you even just add like one or two more things to this offense, it goes nuclear.
Yeah, and I think you kind of need to figure that out because I think my one concern about this offense is kind of how shallow it is after you get past the really good guy. And the really good guys are really good. But if St. Brown goes down for a little bit, your
Yeah,
receiving options
agreed.
are a little scary. If Laporta goes down for a little bit, tight ends behind him aren't that great. So that's kind of why the Jameson Williams is very important because you kind of do need that other option and Gibbs in the passing game as well. So that's my one kind of concern about this offense is really how top heavy it is. And the top is amazing. It's going to be one of the best offenses in the league. But if something happens a little
But
bit, there's
yeah,
not a lot to back it up.
I think that's really fair. The other thing is like Jared Goff, amazing on first and second down, fifth in QBR. I think he's like top 3 on first down. Obviously, when both the run and the pass are on the table, it's a big thing. And then on third down, the numbers drop off to he's 16th in QBR, which is not terrible or anything, but it actually does remind me of kind of like the Niners before they got better on third
Yeah.
down, and a lot of that has to do with Brandon Ayuk, and I just it just shows you like the value. This offense is so unique and so difficult to stop, and so good at blending the run and the pass, and using motion and controlling the middle of the field and making everything look the same. But there comes a time when you're just in a normal drop back situation and you need a dude on the outside sometimes, and that hasn't happened for them yet. And I'm still a believer. I'm still holding on to my JMO stock,
Yeah.
but you got to see it. Defense is where there's more changes. So let's get to that. And this is, I think, the more interesting side of the ball because of those changes. Last year they were the best run defense in football. They actually finished 16th in passing DVOA, but I think you really saw that pass defense exposed in big moments. On money downs, they just couldn't cover. So
Yeah.
they heavily invested in that side of the ball. You trade for Carlton Davis, you draft Terrion Arnold, you draft Dennis Rakestraw. It sounds like, this took me by surprise, Brian Branch is going to play safety instead of nickel for them this year, which I think is interesting. We could talk about that because I thought he was like instantly one of the best nickels in the NFL last year. And then up front, they had DJ Reader, Marcus Davenport to a pass rush in hopes of giving Aiden Hutchinson, who was amazing last year, some help. So let's start here. Do you think they did enough to address the pass defense?
Yeah, I think so. Like they kind of did what they could do, right? And we're just kind of going to see if it works because they tried this last year also because like the things that we're going to say about them this year, they kind of did try last year. You bring in Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, CJ Gardner-Johnson, but Emmanuel Mosley goes down 2 snaps into the season. CJ Gardner-Johnson gets hurt in the second week of the season. So that really left the secondary exposed with not a lot of depth. So they went back to the well. I think they got more players. I think they got better players with slightly higher upside here. So I think it is going to be definitely better. It's a lot to put on a rookie cornerback for Terrion Arnold just to kind of go out there and be really good from the start. I think he looked pretty good in the one preseason game he played, but it was like, 13 coverage snaps, but I don't think he saw a target. And that was like running against Neighbors and Jalen Hyatt. So he was doing all right. He was, both him and Rick Straw had 2 of the highest press coverage rates in college football last year. So I think that's going to play well into what the Lions want to do. So if, Arnold is good, and I think, like you said, we don't see tight ends be good in year 1 often or really at all. That used to be what corners were until like the Sauce Gardner year and Derek Stingley, and just kind of now every highly drafted corner is pretty good starting off. Because I think the same thing that we say about like wide receivers coming in, it's the same thing with corners because they're playing against these wide receivers in all of those things. So I think they're getting more reps also. So I think we're seeing better year one corners too. So I think you can kind of be okay with Arnold kind of jumping in where he is. I'm interested in what that safety room does look like, because I think the defense was better once Ife Melifonwu was started, and that wasn't really until week 14. But now if you have Brian Branch playing a little more safety and you still have Kirby Joseph, how does that rotation work? Are you going to play more three safety, I guess? But if then Branch is kind of the slot again. So I don't know. It's interesting. There's much better players in the secondary, which I think helps, because this was a team that even when they got pressure, it didn't work quite as well because the secondary just couldn't hold up. So you had Aiden Hutchinson just kind of getting pressure on like every snap by himself because there wasn't a lot of help there. And it just still led to some big plays on the back end just because there wasn't enough in the secondary. So I commend the Lions for, again, trying to completely do what they could do to bring in more to not have that happen. We just kind of, it's a lot of new pieces. So we just got to kind of see how it works together.
Yeah. You mentioned like rookie corners coming in and playing well. I mean, not the best, but one of the best seasons by a rookie corner ever was Marshawn Lattimore, who was coached by Aaron Glenn, who's their defensive coordinator, who by all accounts is like one of the very like the top coaches at coaching young corners in the NFL. Everybody I've talked to about this, that's how he got, he was a DB's coach. So I'm optimistic about his ability to get good play out of these young players. I do think it's interesting. Like you talked about how those guys both pressed. Clearly they were drawn to their traits. Terrion Arnold was a good man corner in college. They want to play more man. They took a step back from it last year, but that's Aaron Glenn's DNA.
Yeah.
He wants to play more man. I think, whether or not they can do so, we'll see early on, especially with still a question mark at edge. It's like wide receiver for this team where you're just like, oh, like, I don't know who Marcus Davenport is at this point. So that is a question mark opposite Aiden Hutchinson, who, they blitzed, like you said, they blitzed a lot to get him opportunities. I will say, DJ Reader, one of my favorite signings. I feel like it flew under the radar when it happened. That dude has just been good every place he's played at. And I think so notably for this, first of all, this defense was already incredible against the run, right? We talked about that. But I'm very intrigued by the potential of DJ Reader's addition unlocking the interior pass rush you get from Alim McNeil and Levi Onwuzurike, who, I don't say I had written off. I mean, he was a Husky. Like, he's really like high upside prospect, super twitchy, super strong. Just, he had like the upside. And actually in Washington, he was more of like a space eater. But Lions fans have been telling me, and I've been seeing camp reports, no, he's really like, looking like he's going to get after the quarterback this year. Alim McNeil's going to get at the quarterback. DJ Reader last year was the 11th most, when he played before he got hurt, was the 11th most double teamed defensive. He's been double teamed at pretty high rates his entire career. That hasn't happened in Detroit. Like no one on that defensive line has been double teamed at a high level. So him in there eating up blockers, I think could really open up opportunities for an interior pass rush.
Yeah. And it's going to not only the interior, but also help on the edge where, Hutchinson might get some more one-on-ones because you're really worried about what's going to be happening inside. So I think that does help everything going around. But like you said, the second edge spot is definitely the defense's version of the second wide receiver because it's a question that doesn't have a great answer. Marcus Davenport's played 13 games once in his career. And he's been fun when on the field, but that's not something you can rely on. Josh Pascal hasn't, really developed in the way they were hoping, although he had some good reps, I think, like when they bumped him inside on like kind of third downs, but I don't know if they'll be doing that quite as much now that they have more interior presence. Then you have James Houston, who was really fun in his rookie year as that kind of like the pass rush specialist. And then he got hurt early last year. So you're still just kind of banking on a best case scenario breaking out for someone. I think that's a little tough to rely on. But like you said, I think the interior pass rush is definitely going to help them. This is still a team that was really good at getting pressure last year when there was really only one real pass rush threat along that defensive line. So they were still able to do that, but they were only 13th in DVOA when they created pressure. Again, because everything else just kind of couldn't hold up. So I think the defense as a whole is definitely going to work together better, which is going to be a help. And like early in the season when things were working, like this was a top 10 defense by DVOA. And the projections this year, that was, I think, one of the most surprising pieces in the book is it's still projected to be a top 10 defense by DVOA this year. So if everything comes together, like this could be a very fun and kind of dangerous unit, which it just, they didn't have the ability to do that last year.
Yeah, another player I didn't mention, Jack Campbell. Again, we talked about tight ends. Rookie linebackers don't usually play well. He had ups and downs, but that could be another, if he takes a step as the Mike, we use the entrenched Mike now for this defense. Year two, that would help a great deal if he gets better in coverage in particular, but he'll have plenty of help with those safeties. So yeah, I'm intrigued. Team to watch is a potential trader for an edge rusher, by the way. There's another team in the division who I'm also keeping an eye on. It's not the Packers, who we're going to talk about next. Let's take a break. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words: Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer: hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. All right, we're back. The Green Bay Packers. I love talking about the Packers.
Yeah.
Let's do the defense first, because we've been starting with the offense. And that's where the offense is basically the same. So the defense, some changes. A lot of changes here. Yeah. The big change, big signing, very unpacker-like Xavier McKinney. I've talked about that a lot. Play safety. You draft Javon Bullard also. That was probably the biggest problem with this defense last year was the safety position. Otherwise, it's the same group. However, they drafted Edgerrin Cooper, who's a linebacker. The biggest change, of course, is the defensive coordinator, Jeff Hafley. Massive scheme change, 30,000-foot view. You're looking at, a 4 down front with edges rushing from a wide 9 alignment, and then playing a lot more single high, a lot more cover 1 man, leaning back on what he did in college. So let's start there, top down. Do you feel like what I just described is a good fit for the defensive players they have?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a great fit for pretty much everybody. Yeah, let's fall in love with the Packers defense again. That's never gotten us in trouble ever.
Somebody could make a super cut of me being like, this is the year. This is the year.
But I think this could be, at least, right? I think schematically, this, I think, might be the most interesting unit in the league, just because of how they are shifting. We see so much more, too high and all of this taking over the league, and the Packers are going back to single high and man coverage. And I think it really does play to what they have defensively. I think especially along the defensive line, I think having them play more aggressive and faster. I think Rashawn Gary has already said he feels so much more explosive having his hand in the dirt more often than he was. Like, you're not going to have Preston Smith dropping back into coverage anymore.
Iconic. That was when you knew it was over. That when that screenshot of Preston Smith dropping into coverage started making the rounds, I was like, "Ooh, Joe Barry, it's over." It's so Joker.
And that could have been like any time during his tenure there. So I do think the way they're going to be able to play faster on the defensive line, I think that's going to open up the linebackers too, because they're not going to have to think as much about the run fits and where they are in playing off the gap and a half that the defensive line's playing. Now there's just kind of a gap and shoot up if you really want to in those run fits. So I think they'll be able to play faster, which is going to help them. Jair Alexander's been wanting to play more aggressive coverage and shadow number one receivers for
Do it.
years. And I think
Yeah.
now he
We've
will be
seen him do
able
it.
to. So I think that is definitely going to work out for the secondary. And then talk about Xavier McKinney. I love Xavier McKinney, and he's so good, which I think just kind of got overshadowed a little bit because of what the defensive talent was in the back end around him with the Giants over the last like 2 years. But he can do a little bit of everything. Has that range to be the post safety if they need him to be. He can play in the slot, can play in the box. I think he's going to be able to move all around. And I think they've even talked about they have the positional flexibility on that back end where before the snap, they're going to communicate which one of the safeties is going to be dropping. So it's just going to be one of those things where like they can be changing it up as they go. And I think that is going to be a real big thing that they could definitely do, just kind of changing those looks. And it just wasn't a thing that the Packers had. It was, we're going to be playing as off as we possibly can in too high. And if you want to throw something in front of our soft zone coverage, go for it, because we're not going to stop you.
Oh God, so many painful memories of watching that defense sit back and give I think at one point I went on a rant about this on the pod, like these 8-yard cushions. I was just like, this is disgusting. Okay. So I think I agree with everything you said about the personnel. I really like, particularly up front, the idea of like Kenny Clark and Wyatt just one gapping, and I think the edges it's a good fit too. And you could see it helping the linebackers maybe having to think a little bit less, but whether or not this all works, I think is really predicated on what happens on the back end.
Yeah.
And because they're going to have to get a good feel for what they're capable of in terms of how much man coverage they can play, how much McKinney can be that center fielder. What you just mentioned about the possibility that the safeties might be a little bit more interchangeable. You might present some cover 2 shells and you spin them in and out of them. I think that's going to be really important, particularly, by the way, this defense, or the offense, pardon me, which we're going to talk to in a second, ripped up like single high defenses, Cowboys at the end. This is an offensive coordinator who knows how to take advantage of static or sort of man heavy defenses. So I think I'm interested in seeing the idea that like LaFleur himself and this offense could help the defense avoid some of those pitfalls, being susceptible to play action or motion or misdirection and that kind of thing. So I have to think, this was a huge hire for LaFleur. It was one I don't think he wanted to make, honestly. I don't think he wanted to fire Joe Barry. So he's going to be invested in making sure it works, because this is that hire, like you said, could be the determinant of whether or not this team wins the division and goes to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think the success of this, like the Packers defense might be, I don't know if I want to say the most important unit like in the league, but I think it does like shift the landscape of what we're expecting for the team's success. Because if this defense works, like the Packers are one of the best teams in the league, I think. If they're okay, they're still a really good team. If it doesn't work, then the Packers are just kind of what they've been the past couple of years. So I think singularly what this defense is, and I think we're kind of talking about it this way because we don't really know, because we haven't really seen this type of defense in this way really used to this extent. When we see some of the, single high stuff where it's like, the passive cover 3 that like the Colts are still running. It's not going to kind of be this more aggressive.
Or it's the Browns where they just have stars at every, level. And it's like, well, do the Packers have stars? Maybe, I don't know. I like Rashawn Gary. I like Jair Alexander, so yeah, it's going to, I think this is one where I really, it's one of the things I want to see the most, honestly. The offense, on the other hand, I think we're all super, super confident in, high on, based on the second half of the season. I read your chapter on this, and it's so obvious in the chapter that you're just like in love with this offense and in love with Jordan Love and everything and these young playmakers. But I think the way to talk about it and to kind of lead into the season is like, let's discuss what changed. Like, what was it? Because you got into this. What was it at, around week 10 or so when things really started to click with this offense that made it so unbelievably successful?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I think early in the year, I think Jordan Love was like just really pressing and trying to do it too much. He was like trying to make things happen, especially down the field. And we saw him have a much higher rate of throws of 20 or more air yards earlier in the season and a very high inaccurate rate. He just wasn't hitting those throws. He was just, trying to like accurately like place them in a way that just kind of made them ineffective. And I think there was a point somewhere in the middle of the season where LaFleur kind of said to Jordan Love, like, just kind of like stop thinking so much and just kind of let it rip a little bit. And I think that was a piece that just kind of mentally allowed Jordan Love to just play more freely. And I think we definitely saw that in the second half of the season. And I think LaFleur kind of took that on himself too. And he kind of changed the structure of what that offense was. Because I think in the first half of the season, I think he struggled to marry the Aaron Rodgers offense with what the Jordan Love offense should have been. Like he when LaFleur came in, he wanted to, be that under center motion type of thing. Aaron Rodgers was like, no, I don't like any of that. And they eventually did find a happy medium there and 2 MVPs, and it did work. But that didn't necessarily work for Jordan Love earlier in the season. So they ended up switching to a lot more motion, being under center more, and just kind of having that opening up the spacing, I think really helped Jordan Love just kind of be more relaxed. They went from 48.5% of plays with motion in the first half to 60.4%. In the second half. And then they were 4th in DVOA with motion in the second half of the season. Just kind of the way they really opened up the offense horizontally and vertically, because they were stretching a lot of things in some really fun ways. Like I think this year the Packers are going to be like running full route trees off jet motion, because like, yeah, I think we've seen kind of jet motion where you can kind of like run a couple of things. We've seen like the jet wheel that, Tyreek Hill has run since, back with the Chiefs. The Packers were like running the inbreakers and digs and deep posts off these jet motions. And I just think like that's just going to continue in a way that's so much fun with their receivers. So, and when you look at that, like Love didn't throw deep as often, but he was so much better throwing deep because he was picking his spots better. He wasn't thinking about it quite as much. And I just think there was just a comfortability in that second half of the season that really just kind of translated. And I think that's why it's going to be, you don't always like seeing big boosts over the second half of the season because that doesn't always translate to the next season. But the Packers went from okay to great. It wasn't like it went from bad to good. Like that second half of the season was so good. It made all of the whole season stats really good. So that's why it's much more, you can just kind of look at it and think that it translates from season to season more than, a second half boost might typically.
I love the way you described it, because I think what's sometimes kind of lost in the second half of the season is we just think Jordan Love just figured things out and played better. But as you said, a lot of it was also Matt LaFleur realizing, I can run this very motion heavy offense, getting these guys on inbreakers, working the middle of the field. They were unbelievable in the middle of the field, getting yards after the catch. And I have a profound understanding of my young wide receivers and what they're good at.
Yes.
You wrote about how like Jaden Reed, once they figured out vertically what he could do from the slot, Tavian Wicks working in the middle of the field. Like it's just, it just started clicking for everyone in this offense. And the run game looked better as well. So the whole thing kind of just came together as like a plan, and there was like a very clear vision for this offense, and you really saw that on display. I mentioned this in the game against Dallas, going back and watching the contrast between the two offenses, not just the play of the quarterbacks, but the offenses and the play calling and the coaches and the way the receivers used. Just a thing of beauty in Green Bay. But I do want to mention Matt LaFleur did a great job of setting up Jordan Love to succeed, and Jordan Love showed faith in the structure of the offense. Jordan Love also balled out on his own in the second half of the season, throws without play action, second league-wide in QBR, tight window throws, second league-wide in QBR. Like if you take away all the schemed up stuff, he was still an absolute assassin.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. I think there was a big part that the scheme just did help him feel more comfortable. And then we saw that raw talent that had him drafted where he was. And I think that just became even more of a weapon, as we saw, like his little fadeaways off pressure, the way he's able to just place the ball in a way that is just insane. It was it's so fun to watch. And like, I just really think what they have going right now. And it is just a way where I think they have such a good understanding. I think we already saw it like in the preseason. Don't want to get blown away by like the 2 passes he had in the preseason, but the deep touchdown to Dontavian Wicks that they had against Cleveland. No, but I think I really like that is because it's a 3-by-1 set. The outside receiver is Luke Musgrave. So that brings an outside corner onto Musgrave in that play. That puts Wicks as the number 2 on a safety. And even though it was, Ronnie Hickman, who's probably not going to start for Cleveland, but just that kind of understanding is those are the mismatches that we're trying to create. And then Wicks runs right by him. Like that's the kind of understanding that the Packers have of how to use this personnel right now. And I think we're just getting started in, I think, what they can accomplish there in the passing game.
All right. Before every other fan of every other team just throws up listening to this, if the Packers offense, let's wrap here, doesn't take a step, why will that have happened? Like, what is the one thing you're worried about with this offense other than obviously injuries?
Yeah, the injuries kind of, I think, do play a part if they can't really figure out what the offensive line combination is going to be. I think they do have good pieces along the offensive line. And I still think they're trying to figure out what their best 5 is going to be. I think they have a couple of guys who can play some different places. The other thing is like if the run game doesn't take off in a way that they kind of hope it would.
Yeah.
And I know back when we did the free agency pod, I was a little down on Josh Jacobs and that signing. I'm still not going to say like I would have done that signing if I were them, but I think that's the signing I've flipped the most on since then, because kind of what we talked about with Aaron Jones about how that Packers run game was so based on not having bad plays. And I think that had a little bit to do with the offensive line that was able to run block well. And I think you kind of saw what happened last year for Jacobs with the Raiders. So many of his runs were just stopped at the line of scrimmage, and he really did not have any chance on a lot of his runs. He had one of the highest stuff rates in the league. But when you look at runs that weren't stuffed, he had similar efficiency to Aaron Jones and had better efficiency in 5 to 10 yard runs and 10 plus yard runs. So I think that run game can be a little more explosive if Josh Jacobs does get some of those holes that he's able to run through. And again, we've seen him lead the league in rushing yards. I don't think he's going to do that again, but I do think there could be an explosive element to the run game if that offensive line does hold up. It's hard to find a reason why this offense is not good, because I think even in the worst case scenario, it's still a good offense. Maybe it's not like a top 5 offense if it doesn't, hit its peak, but I think it's going to be hard to see this offense not being good at the least.
Yeah, the only other thing I throw out is I think Love's probably going to turn the ball over more than he did in the second half of last season. His turnover rate was really low, even though it was, like you said, he was being a little more discretionary about when he pushed the ball downfield, but he's a risk taker. Yeah. He's an aggressive thrower, and I think that could bite him a little bit, so we'll see. I'm very optimistic about that offense. Very, very excited about it. I'm also very excited to watch Caleb Williams. Let's wrap with the Bears. Yeah. I've talked about him a lot, so I will just set the table for you. We have seen a lot of this young quarterback already, which is very fun, although obviously not against all starters. And we've seen him with his starters, so that's given us a little bit of insight into what this all might look like. What are your, I guess based on what we've seen thus far, what are you expecting out of this offense in the early part of the season?
So I think structurally is still one of the most interesting things that I'm looking at, because you would think with what they brought in, right? You have DJ Moore right now, you have Keenan Allen, you have Rome Odunze. You would think this would be like a, spread 11 personnel offense. And they've run the least amount of 11 personnel so far in this preseason. And I was kind of like, I saw that and I was thinking, all right, maybe that's just because they don't have depth at wide receiver. So that's like later in second halves that are skewing it. But no, it's only 48.7% of the snaps that Caleb Williams has been on the field have been in 11. So that is very interesting, just kind of structurally, and not quite what I thought the offense was going to be. It's a lot heavier in 12, like 23% of Caleb Williams snaps so far. So that is interesting. The cool Caleb Williams stuff is still here. And the fact that he's able to do it, I think a lot. I've seen some like, this is what we saw in college. We knew he could do this, but like, yeah, like I think we see players in college who try to get away with that and can't at the NFL. So the fact that he's been able to kind of get those balls accurately out on the move in the way he's able to contort his body, still get velocity on it, like that is very cool to see. Like I do think we want to see a little more in structure, but I mean, it's the preseason. I'm not too worried about that. I think he's kind of showcased that in what he has been able to do. Like, I don't think he's going to be some like run around and scramble type of guy for the entire season. Like, he does have the second highest time to throw in the preseason this year, which, is a little concerning. But again, he's not doing that really dangerously in a way that I think it's limiting what the offense can do. So yeah, I mean, I'm still super high on what this offense can potentially be, because he looks the part already. And I think it's only going to get better as he, gets a little more time in the regular season.
Yeah, I've been interested, like you, in the personnel usage, trying to figure out the roles of everybody in this offense.
Yeah.
I've already shared my thoughts on Caleb. Big deal. I think if I had one takeaway from the preseason, I kind of think Rome Odunze is going to be even a bigger part maybe than we knew. Not just because of Keenan Allen's size.
So that I don't
really know what's going on there.
Are we concerned about Keenan Allen? Because I don't know if it's like even just his size, but like go. Yeah, so but he's go back to so Hard Knocks has been an interesting edit for him, because I think in the first episode they were talking about how he hasn't been able to like get a catch against Jalen Johnson, which
who's great,
understandable, yes, a great corner. And then I think in the latest episode, they just like quickly did like a throwaway, like, oh, Keenan Allen's been great and he's been catching everything, and then it just kind of like really cut away like real quick. It didn't spend a whole lot of time on that.
There's a rep where he has trouble getting open. It's a difficult route. I mean, I that's been kind of making the rounds. Sorry, for people who are not terminally online or plugged into the Bears, there are a lot of reports about Keenan Allen getting a little larger and slowing down. I feel like that guy's just going to have like old man at the
which was always his game anyway. Like he wasn't a speed guy to begin with, and I think that's why he dropped in the draft when he did, because he ran like a 4.6, 4.7. So like he was never a speed guy to begin with, but.
He doesn't. Look, I meant to make this more about Odunze. I just think he just is freaking awesome. It's funny because I feel like because of where he was drafted, with the quarterback being drafted where he was, maybe it got a little bit lost how insane it is that they're also adding a top 10 receiver talent from the draft, and a combination of him and more. But I've been super intrigued by some of the stuff he's flashed earlier on. He had a huge end around, which was interesting. You've seen both I think like he's an underrated separator and route runner. Yes. Sometimes he gets like miscast as this just like big contested catch guy. I mean, I get that's not true. He wins downfield. He is a great contested catch guy, and he's not like a burner, but he's plenty of field speed. I loved how because I've talked about this from Caleb's side, I didn't talk about from the Rome side. I loved how on the crazy throw, the one that everybody's been talking about from last week, not the end zone where Rome didn't get his feet down, but the one before that, where he's rolling to his left. Hearing Rome talk about it afterwards, how, the way he was reading the defenders and then going into creation scramble mode and making, getting open for Caleb, that's so important with mobile quarterbacks. And the fact that he's thinking about that and talking about it, and that that they already have that chemistry early on, I think is pretty significant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how often the tight ends are on the field. Shane Waldron is a little bit of a cipher, honestly. Like I get asked about him a lot, like what is a Shane Waldron offense? And I have trouble answering that question because when he was in Seattle, I think, he showed a lot of different things. There was years where, they had multiple tight ends. Seattle used a ton of 12 and 13 personnel, but I didn't feel like that was so much a statement of identity as necessity with pass protection and
Right.
The skill players that they had. And I think with this thing, it's going to be built around just like who's your best starting group. And I think that that's still kind of shaking out for them on offense. I still think they're going to have a really good run game. I think if this, to kind of do what we did with the Packers just now, if this goes wrong, I think it would be one of two things. Either Williams just never plays in structure. I think there's this expectation that he will, and he's talked about, he needs to play faster and he took a bad sack. And I'm certainly not basing any thoughts on, 6 preseason drives that he's not going to do that. But there is a world in which there's too many negative plays, too many sacks. And then the other thing that concerns me is this offensive line. I mean, I'm looking at it and there's still question marks, particularly on the interior. You got Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright at tackle, and that's fine. But on the inside, I don't really know, other than Tevin Jenkins, like what the starting combination we're going to be. And if Williams, again, he's shown great sack evasion in the preseason, but that could be a serious problem for him if that isn't shorn up.
Yeah, I think that would be my issue here too. Like the first game, I think Matt Pryor started at guard, and the line looked a little better, and I think Caleb was a little more comfortable. And then Nate Davis started at guard in the second preseason game, which I think the Bears were hoping like would be the starter. But I think reports are he hasn't been that great, and I think didn't look that great in the preseason game either. So I think if there is one, like that interior pressure could definitely be something that, forces Caleb into, USC mode, where there wasn't a lot in structure and he kind of had to bail everything out. The interesting thing with Caleb is I do wonder if there is a kind of still a high floor when he does go into creation mode. Because I think we saw even last year at USC when he was playing out of structure all the time, he doesn't put the ball in danger. He had like a 1.3% interception rate, which for how often he was trying to make something happen is pretty wild. And I think just kind of shows how smart he is with the ball and kind of in that creation mode, where he's not doing crazy things that are going to really hurt the offense in that way. So I do think there is a slightly higher floor there because I think he's going to be smart in the way he does that, which I think is something that should translate. But yeah, like you said, if it is like constant pressure and he is just, trying to escape the pocket and trying to make the Cole Kmet throw or that Rome Odunze throw like all the time, then yeah, that's when this offense like might not be great down to down.
So watching him early on, it's funny because obviously the out of structure throws is very Mahomesian, and that's and Aaron Rodgers in it. But so far, it's really reminded me of early career Russell Wilson. And when I think back to maybe it's just because like he's built like him. I don't know, something about the way he's like spinning out of some of these sacks because, Roger. I mean, Mahomes has done that obviously,
right.
But and Rodgers is quite mobile earlier in his career, but there's something Wilsonian about it. And when I think back to Russell Wilson's first season where he did, there was like these explosive plays and, Russ has never been a guy who like plays super fast or whatever, but he actually didn't take a ton of sacks, which is kind of like he took way more later in his career. And I do wonder if it plays out a little bit more like that. And I think back to that offense, it was a very dominant rushing attack as well. I think there's going to be some similarities in like structurally, a lot of play action. I could see it. I mean, he was awesome. So like and I think Caleb Williams has a higher ceiling. I want to be clear. I'm just saying there's some similarities there that make me think maybe the sack thing won't be too bad, even if he ends up with a long time to throw.
Yeah. And I think that'll be, I think part of the offense. I think we're going to see some more design boots and things that he'll get him out of the pocket, but in a structured way where he's going to be able to make some of those throws. I think they're going to use like a lot more pistol, which is something Waldron did in Seattle, which they haven't run a snap of with Caleb yet in the preseason. But I think that's something they'll use a little more. And like, Gino was real good with pistol when they were able to use that. So I think that's something that is just going to be kind of a piece that gets him a little more, instructor can still use some of that play action, but be further back and read the field in that way. So I think there are a lot of in structure things that the Bears are going to have in the regular season that we haven't really seen in the preseason yet, which I think kind of quells some of the concerns that you might have in the way he's played so far.
So the Bears defense, let's wrap here. How many back sevens around the NFL are better than this back seven?
I don't know. They're good, and they're fun too. And yeah, I mean, I think Jalen Johnson's been good for a while. Last year, he was just incredible, like easily the best corner, like in the league last year. I'm not going to say Jalen Johnson is the best corner in the league overall, but like his play last year was the best corner.
You could argue he's the best zone corner in the NFL, and I wouldn't dispute it.
Yeah. So yeah, the way they played, I think right now, I think if there's a concern, it's like Kevin Byard. They could have done a little better at that second safety spot. I think they kind of rushed in that signing, but
I think like him and a bunch of kids. He is pulling that age average way up because everyone else is like they're almost like the Packers offense on defense back there. Like it's so fun and young, and they're figuring out everyone's roles. You got Johnson, who's the best zone corner. You got Kyler Gordon. Oh God, Kyler.
Oh man, that's going to be fun.
Flying around, physical, blowing up screens. Jaquan Brisker's a playmaker. He's got like such good like route recognition. He reads quarterbacks well. Tyreek Stevenson, I think, is an ascendant young player at corner. Like, and all those guys, all of them. I mean, God, they must all be under 20. How old is Johnson?
He's probably
they're really young.
Let's see. Yeah.
So, anyways, they're super young, super fun. They're super like fast and physical, and then like Byard's, he's coming off of a pretty tough year, but he is. It's like that Splinter meme where he's with the turtles.
Yeah, and like if that's going to be his role, like that's cool, and I think there is enough on that defensive secondary that it is going to help. And Jalen Johnson just turned 25 in April, so if he's like the old guy who is now in year 5, that's crazy. So yeah, I think they're going to be a lot of fun in a way that they were able to over the second half of the season. Like this was another unit that really changed, not so much structurally, but what they could do after that Montez Sweat trade. And the Sweat trade wasn't so much in the way they were able to get pressure, because they were, they think they were 32nd in pressure rate before the Sweat trade. They only jumped up to 25th after. So it wasn't like they were this massive advantage in getting pressure with Montez Sweat, but in the way they were able to get pressure, the secondary was able to play a little more aggressive. And the second half turnaround was really, it was driven by turnovers, which I think is why if you look at like the DVOA projections, you don't love the Bears defense because it was generated a lot off turnovers, which is not something you can really sustain from year to year usually. But I think, again, it's one of those in the way they played because of a change that was made. I think you can look at what they were able to do and think it does sustain at least like a little bit. They might not be, second in turnovers per drive like they were last season, but I think that is going to be their mentality. That's going to be how they play, which I think is definitely going to help that secondary, which is awesome.
They're awesome. And I think that, again, like I don't want to overstate the youth, but like it is really similar to the Packers offense when we talk about improvement. Like, oh yeah, of course they were playing better in the second half of the season once they all learned how to play together. And Stevenson in particular played better, I thought, as the year went on. It makes sense that like a young secondary would get better. I think, I handled a question. We did a mailbag and somebody asked me about whether there'd be like regression, and I mentioned the turnovers, but even if you take out turnovers, a lot of the underlying metrics are still pretty positive. They were still really good in success rate. So on like a down to down basis, this is a defense that just tackled really well. They were outstanding versus the run. I mean, we've been talking about the secondary, this linebacker duo. Oh God, like I think they're so good. They play so well together. Edmonds and Edwards, so underrated. They were first in opponent QBR on 10 to 20-yard throws, which I think is really captured a lot by how good the linebackers were in coverage. I thought they were, this is like when Ryan Pace paid both those linebackers, I was like, it's an interesting approach to team building.
Yeah.
And in some ways you can say it worked because they're great. And I think having two, most teams don't even have one really good off-ball linebacker these days, is so useful in today's NFL. But the question is, if you can't rush the passer, does any of this matter? How much of it can you cover up if you can't get after the quarterback? Because as great as Sweat was, and he was great as a player I've been high on for a long time, not a lot going on outside of Sweat, and they didn't add to it, and we can talk about that. I mentioned earlier that I thought the Lions were a team who might trade. This was the other team that is constantly brought up as a potential trader for a pass rusher. I don't know where all these pass rushers are going to come from. But that is the reason why I didn't put the Bears in my top 10 defense pod, and I really wrestled with it because I love this back seven. Is I'm just very apprehensive of this pass rush.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest question here, is who is that going to be that second pass rusher? And we saw they thought they were going to get Matt Judon. They were a team that was in the sweepstakes, and I guess if Judon had wanted an extension, he would have been a Bear. But I guess for some reason has been holding out to get an extension, but then didn't want to sign one with the Bears, and then went to Atlanta where they weren't going to make him sign an extension. Weird, but I think the fact that the Bears were looking for that second pass rusher is, I think, a plus that they are going to be on the lookout. Can they be a Hassan Reddick team?
I mean, that would be amazing. If they traded for Hassan Reddick, I would be like,
So if
think this team can contend for the,
if they were going to give a third round pick, which is what was confirmed on Hard Knocks when Ryan Pace was talking about it, you give a third for Hassan Reddick, who's still younger than Judon. I think it's probably a better fit for what they want to do in this defense. You have the cap space for an extension. So if you're willing to give a third round pick, like that's technically more than the Jets gave up for Reddick, because it was a conditional third round pick in like 2026. So if you give a 2025 third and you're Joe Douglas, you can still say that you came out kind of on top. I think the Jets do need some pass rushers, but if that situation just isn't going to work, Hassan Reddick and Montez Sweat, like that's a fun duo that I think could work well. But like, I think Austin Booker has been fun, been really good in the preseason, but that's asking a lot of like a 5th round rookie if he's going to be the number 2 guy.
We talked about him on the Mike Renner brought him up as a player, so I got to watch a little bit of his tape ahead of the combine, and he is fun. I mean, he's huge. He has like super cool athletic tools, but like, again, we're talking like it's year one, and this is a team that should be, I think that similar to the Vikings, like they should be trying to make it to the playoffs, and deservedly so. And especially based on what we've seen early on from Caleb Williams. So I would really like them to do something. I mean, I think that there's hope they'll get a little bit more out of it's a very young defensive tackle group. And I think there's hope that like year 1, 2 for some of these guys, you can get a little bit more out of, Dexter and Billings and Pickens and, in terms of pass rush, but it just feels like they're a guy away up front, and that would be. I mean, it might be between them and the Lions, frankly, for the services of a Reddick or anyone who's disgruntled.
Yeah, that would be fun. And like, if you're the Bears, like I don't think there's a sense of like doing half measures right now, where we have this team has the goods, I think, on defense. And to kind of sit out, I think it's good that it was shown that they were confirmed in on Judon and thought they were going to get him, because I think it does show that they aren't going to have those half measures. They are continuously looking to get better. It's fun. So I'm gonna be on the watch for what they do over the next week or so, because if it's not Reddick, it could be somebody. I don't know who else that would be, but I think just adding something to be kind of that second pass rusher there, I think just gives that line so much more depth. Because again, like Montez Sweat was really good individually, but did not make the Bears overall this great pass rush team. So I think you just add that one more guy that just kind of accentuates what Sweat can do also. And I think that's how it
if
goes.
they could get after the quarterback, you're like, turnovers tend to regress, and they had a lot of them last year and whatever. But so we can, people sometimes hate it when I say like, turnover luck, turnovers. It's just statistically true. Sorry. Like we've seen this time and time again, when you're trying to look for teams who will be better or worse, it's the thing you look at. However, defense that plays a ton of zone with playmaking DBs, they're going to have, they have guys who will get interceptions. So it won't be like it was in the second half of last season, but they're still going to need a lot of turnovers. If they had a pass rush on top of that, then you're cooking with gas.
Yeah.
And they did not have that. And right now, the current state of the Bears, the back seven is compensating for that. Right. And they're really good and they're really well coached and they play really hard. And after Matt Eberflus took over the defense, which has kind of been a little slept on.
Yes. Yes, it has.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Oh, I don't want to rank this division. Oh, it's so hard. They're good. They're all good. I like them all. I'll make you go first and then I will cowardly follow.
Okay. I don't want to do this either. I think I am going to go Packers, Lions, Bears, Vikings. And
I'm going to go, yeah.
And I could switch the top two and bottom two. Yeah. I don't have a strong.
I'll go Lions, Packers, Bears, Vikings. But I think they could all make the playoffs. Everybody gets candy. I really do. I think, I'm interested in seeing how this Sam Darnold thing plays out. So I'll just say that. We'll see. This has been really fun. You guys should, again, cannot stress enough how great the almanac is. You just go to ftnfantasy.com/almanac.
I think we'll take you straight there. But I do believe just go to ftnfantasy.com. You'll find it.
It is indispensable. There's chapters on every team. There's really cool stats. There's just stuff on the quarterbacks and all of that, all the injury data, which is really useful too. You guys can follow Dan on Twitter it's just Dan Pizzuta.
It is.
There's nothing weird. I learned right before taping that he was a college gymnast. I have one final question. What's the coolest thing you can do? Or could do?
Yes, those are two very different questions right now.
The horse thing, the rings. Did you have an event?
Yeah, a vault was my best event.
Wow, so you're a flipper.
Yes, yeah, I was.
Cool.
I'll if I find a video, I'll send it to you.
Please. Oh, that's so great. I love that. I can not even do a cartwheel, but at some point I'll try now that I have a child. This is really fun. You guys can check it out on YouTube at youtube.com/@MeanandKimes. Encourage you to go check out the interview with Cam Jordan that is finally up now. He is a ton of fun. This will be on ESPN News or 2 at some point. And as always, thank you to everybody at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, Kevin Mattice, Tucker Tashton for producing this show. We will be back next week with the final preseason reaction before we switch into our usual cadence for the NFL season. I can't wait.